So friends, here's something for you today. We're going to go through these abbreviation lists in the cuff checklists, and we're going to show you what some of these abbreviations mean. So let's get into it.
Yeah, we have reg or reg, means drink lots of OJ. Strat, meaning low clouds must be in the scene. Pat ground, hit your old Grandoon, and the old Grandoon, it was an old comic strip. Subfloor, under posy, which means something's buried under there. And then XLN is Mr. Lincoln's ex-wife. BLK is bilevel potassium. BTW is big, tall woman. CRA is loco moon person, which means a crazy moon person. Dynam, maybe a letter from Farouk. And we got to remember that one because Dynam's in a fuse spine.
Farouk Albez, he was the one who did all of the
time management, and he was also giving them instructions on using the cameras at the same time. He was also in geology. A long can and a short can. A long can actually refers to the length of film for the DAC camera. The long can is a 12-minute film. The short can is a 4-minute film. But in this abbreviation list, they're listing it as Coors or Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. And then DBL means damn big lock. And in brackets, it has Chinese. So they must have had somebody that was from China that had locked something up for them. OTC on the can.
So it says OTC on the can, CREG. Let's look up at REG, and it says drink lots of OJ, which is going to make you what? Go to the can.
And then submantle looks like subfloor. And we'll pull up from the press kit the floor for that. And then light mantle looks like submantle. Dark mantle looks like light mantle. Very dark mantle looks like dark mantle. Summary equals it all looks the same. They're making a joke of all of the stuff. And the thing is to be able to dissect where you see these different instructions here within it. Light mantle, terminus, dynamic means must be a letter from Farouk. And then we'll look down and see what reg drink, and then drink lots of OJ. And then Stonewall, OTC, on the can. Drink lots of OJ and go to the can. Got a letter from Farouk. Then you have light mantle and another variant, and there's no short form for those variants in there. But as you go through here, they keep referring to the light mantle and the different forms. I think they were creating images in the rocks, a variety of images in the rocks for people to look at.
Or it could be a variety of forms, literally the forms, the set that they're putting up are forms. You know,
Yes.
When you're doing a foundation, the forms for the set, because we have them, showing them, putting them up. So it could be that too. It's hard to know.
Yeah, and then you have the light mantle and then the massive. We need that.
Yeah, because you have the subfloor, you have the mantle, you have all that is there. And it's definitely in that Apollo 17 layout. Here we go with the schematic. The schematic view of Taurus littoral landing region.
And so when you have light mantle / massive, it means that they're laying it on here, and you can see in here it's called talus. The subfloor, the light mantle, and you have talus is there to blend in these things. And you can see these arrows here. It's so that they can move these around. These are the background sets on here to move them around. They can be up and down there. You can see they're up and down here and moved in. And this is an exaggeration of 2.5 times the actual height that they were going to build.
Here's something else of interest is that schematic layout here would actually fit perfectly right underneath that crane. And you would be able to just push all these walls into place and you have an instant moon set.
Yeah, except in the case of Apollo 17, I think the set is much bigger than that. That'd be fine for Apollo 11 and 12. 17, it's going to be a lot larger.
Yes, but they had 2 fields full of craters that were separate from each other. So that could have been at location number 2 where this was set up.
Yeah, and I looked at this stuff in there with the grid pattern that they put in the press kit. When you pull up the diagram right here, it has the entire grid pattern. And if you put that down, that those are about 25 feet across, each one of them, then all of these craters work out to the size that are stated that those craters were.
Well, then that would definitely be in crater field number 2.
So when you look at this and this grid pattern that they're showing here, you're going to have about 1,000 feet wide and about 3,000 feet long, if those are 25 foot on the grid, because these craters, when they're stated in the transcript how large they are across, work out to approximately that size of that grid pattern. Anyway, we'll go back to this, the short forms here, and then you have the light mantle. Somebody's to rake it. You got a big, tall woman, local moon person to rake, and you have rake the talus here. The BLK here is relate the bilevel potassium in the talus here. You're raking it.
Did they bring rakes along with them?
No,
or
they
even
didn't
one
have
rake?
rakes.
Yeah, there you go.
This listing here, this abbreviation list, is like their own language that they have put into the cue cards so that they can make jokes, that they can do whatever, or they're stating what they're actually doing on the fake lunar set at Flagstaff. And in here, you have another variant. This means another letter from Farouk Dynam, maybe another letter from Farouk. He's giving them more instructions. And there's probably more abbreviations listed, but this is the only one that's in the cue cards. And you have stop at the big tall woman, local moon person at the scarp. Well, the scarp is the edge along the subfloor to the edge of the scarp. They call it a scarp or a massif.
But if you look at this, it says stop big tall woman, crazy person at scarp. That's basically what it's saying, is stop the tall crazy woman at the scarp. So what's going on here? Is this tall crazy woman is the one raking all of this?
They probably had somebody on the set doing stuff like that. And as you go through, you'll see a hole in the wall.
Hole in the wall. We got to show that hole.
On the Apollo 17, there's the hole in the thing. And of course, they're calling it forms. These are just built as forms, the walls, and another letter from Farouk. We can only assume that there was a whole lot of instructions from a letter from Farouk regarding the light mantle to the scarp, where this talus is being poured in on this section here. And here, at the scarp, you're on the can, right? The guy went over to take a leak right at the edge of the form, right at the edge of the structure. It's in here. And then DBL, damn big lock. So they've got the beer locked up near the scarp. And then this guy must have dock split. He's on the can.
By the submantle.
Yeah.
What I would like to mention is that there's a few subscribers that are having a little bit of difficulty with that beer can that Scott found. Well, here are the beer cans right here in the cue cards, Pabst and Coors.
The Pabst label looks very close to like what a Labatt's Blue is. I mean, I could be mistaken as to the exact label that's on that can.
But it's a beer can. Might not be a Labatt's beer can, but it definitely is a beer can. And here's the evidence of that, especially when they're talking about two different cans of beer right here in the cuff checklists. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, and if you think that's unusual, we'll just pull this one up because it says discard hockey stick.
Hockey stick?
Yeah, remove hockey stick, discard hockey stick. I mean, these guys were screwing around a lot of stuff. They weren't just golfing. Anyway, whatever these short forms were for, they were using it as their own personal language, and they were using it within the cue cards. We can't decipher it exactly. We're just showing you where it is within the cue cards. You can decide what kind of a conversation they were having to put all of this in. This was Lincoln's ex-wife, XNL. They've actually put Lincoln in here, and they don't have a crater named Lincoln.
It's interesting how they have Shorty, then wall, floor, construct, and then Lincoln, they have scarp and forms.
when you come into here, Shorty Crater is in here somewhere. In Apollo 17, they land at Shorty Crater. I don't see it listed here, but you see it even says Scarp there. There's the North Massif, South Massif. There's the Scarp. That's where they were throwing all that talus into.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense, yeah.
But Shorty Crater is one of these. It's not actually listed here, but Shorty Crater is the one where we found, of course, the Corvette. That's Shorty Crater. But you can see they're referring to the walls, the floor, and the structure. And of course, there's the subfloor right there, listed subfloor. DM, dark mantle. There's light mantle, and then they're just making a joke. It all looks the same. Submantle looks like subfloor. They all look the same. Light mantle looks like submantle. Dark mantle looks like light mantle. Very dark mantle looks like dark mantle. Summary, it all looks the same. And they're using this in the cue cards to communicate. We can't decipher the whole thing. But here again, you've got the crazy local moon person at the rim of the scarp. What's it doing in the cue cards? And don't forget, these cue cards were written months before they arrived, faked arriving at the moon. Here it is again for the light mantle. You got the big tall woman, crazy moon person, raking the light mantle here. And it's repeated throughout.
What I was thinking of is on a movie set, you have nicknames for people. I'm not going to tell you what mine was, but what I could tell you is this, is that you get nicknames for the silly things that you do. And if this person is acting silly while she's doing things, that's the name she's going to get. So I understand that. I get it.
Anybody that's worked together with a group of people for a long time have their own language. Single words mean something completely different. But anyway, as we go through these, you'll see the different things with the subfloors. Old OJ, that's what that means. Old Regulus. See, Reg, drink lots of OJ. They got old OJ out there today. And I don't know what this little thing means either, but they put this together. I mean, this has nothing to do with anything. If you needed cue cards to as reminders for the task that you were involved in, or to remind you to check your equipment or your suit or anything else, these cue cards have nothing to do with it. That's why the cartoons are in there. This text has got nothing of that. This is one instruction: to take a stereo of Camelot Crater.
But they're talking about the stereo photography, aren't they?
What's that got to do with them drinking orange juice in those suits?
How could you drink orange juice with your helmet on?
Well, they claim that that was orange juice that spilled over in Apollo 16, was it?
Yeah, well, they had that inside of the LM when it spilled.
Right, but they're doing this, drink lots of orange juice when they're out on an EVA.
But what about that straw that went into the side of that little...
When you open the container and stick the straw in there, how fast is that going to evaporate in a vacuum? Instantly. That section of these cue cards right there have all of these little anomalies here that they have put down, and nobody has ever mentioned them. I don't even know what exhalation is.
Elation is a motion of celestial object from one place to another, local motion.
But anyway, it's in the middle of the cue cards. That's a real fantastic map you got over here. That's really going to help them out. What we're trying to say is they've got a whole lot of a very private language going on. They've worked together so long. They're making jokes about stuff. None of that should be in the cue cards. Absolutely none of that. Those should be instructions and timelines for them to work under, because that's so-called what they were doing training with Farouk and the rest of them. The cue cards were to give them a timeline, like how much time they had at a certain location. And of course, that's impossible as well, because you have no idea how long it would take to get from one location to another on the lunar surface. Those timelines were laid out at Flagstaff and practiced at Flagstaff for months and months and months. And these guys didn't take it seriously, because that's what you're seeing in the cue cards. They didn't take any of their instructions seriously. The idea or concept of using fake information as opposed to dealing with the truth. The problem with the truth is it's boring. And what I mean by boring is it does not incite your imagination. It doesn't have a concept. It doesn't make your mind work or anything else. So it's so much easier to create a story. Everything can be fake about it. You can add to it continuously. You can continuously add more detail to it over time. And that's what we're seeing with the Apollo missions. You can add to it. You can incite the imagination continuously using just ideas. You don't even have to call them fake. It's just that it's not really happening. The difference between that and the truth is, when it comes to space travel, is long, slow, and boring. Nothing is really happening. Like, they're still using fuel-filled rockets, which have so many limitations. When you want to incite people's imagination when it comes to space travel, all you have to do is come up with these concepts, like the orbital mechanic concepts. None of them work, like the halo orbit, the elliptical stuff, the slingshot effect, everything else that they use for that. But because they suggested these ideas, they then claim that they have put them into action. Like, you take Voyager and it's using, 1 and 2. Oh, the slingshot idea of going out to this planet and accelerating using a slingshot to come out there, forgetting the fact that it's a concept. You're fighting the gravitational pull of the sun the entire way. Well, we don't need to discuss that. That's not part of their details. Anyway, there's the guy's name. I was listening to his talking about religion and politics and everything else during that. It's exactly the same thing. You don't have to have facts. You have to put a concept out, and if you repeat the concept often enough, it becomes reality in the minds of the people. And this is what's happened with the space program. It's incited by one person, JFK, and they kept repeating it, and they were probably honestly making an effort. But the reality is the progress of traveling into space, especially with humans on board, is boring, it's slow, it's complicated, it has all kinds of real problems, and people don't want to listen to that. So any information you put out that triggers their imagination, oh, well, we've got this idea and we're going to do this, and then your mind takes over and it finishes off the entire thing. Your own mind, the imagination, fill in the storyline, the blanks, everything else. And this is what's been happening in the space program the entire length of time. So what we're putting out to a lot of people might be boring because it's the truth. It doesn't have a whole lot of action going on. It's not like an action movie. The truth is not that. The problems are there. And when we find the problems, people don't necessarily want to hear that. They want to hear the fantastic story. They want to hear the next rocket launch. And that's why you get guys like that Conrad guy in there going, oh, look at the Polaris Dawn, he's going to launch again. And oh, it's Starlink, like they just put up another one, new Starlink going up. That's the stuff that they want to hear, because that's the stuff that triggers the imagination. The reality is it hasn't progressed for the last 50 years. Like, Russia put Sputnik up in 57. Well, that's launching a satellite. Well, why is that such news today of somebody launching a satellite? It's because the storyline they put behind it triggers the imagination. The reality is Musk has been doing this for more than 20 years, and he's just managing to launch satellites.
I was watching a show yesterday, and what China was doing was they were starting to launch satellites. I believe it was 4 or 5 or something like that at a time, because they want to get into competition with Elon Musk's Starlink system. Now, they're claiming that they are going to be able to launch more and more and more. Guess what their goal is? 10,000 satellites. Do you realize how long that's going to take to get those up there? And let's say they put 50 at a time or 100 at a time. That's a lot of launches. I think one guy calculated it to be 500 launches if they only put that many satellites up at a time. But here's the other thing. They want to do this so that they can cover the areas on the Earth that are not covered. Like, for example, you're out in the ocean somewhere, you won't have to use a satellite telephone. You can just use your cell phone. This is what the Chinese have intended on doing.
Well, that's what the geosynchronous orbit was all about at 20,000 miles out in the middle of the Van Allen belts. What these guys are putting up are in low Earth orbit.
The telecommunications satellites that are up there and the ones for the space network and all the other satellites, those ones up there, they're there because we used to sit up on the roof of Jerry's Pizza Parlor.
Are the satellites 20,000 miles out in the middle of the Van Allen belts? No, they're not.
Oh, no, not those ones. No.
Not those ones, and that's what I'm talking about. You have this ionization that's happening around them. The solar flares are going to take them out, knock them out, everything else.
Yeah, but that's why Elon just launched another two launches of satellites. The satellites are still being knocked out by those solar storms.
In low Earth orbit.
Yeah, in low Earth orbit.
Yeah, at 100 miles. Like I said, I'm listening to a man that was making an awful lot of sense on what the appeal of the general population is. Truth or fantasy. And fantasy has its own rewards because it triggers, it incites people, it gets them together, it gives them a purpose, it coordinates them much quicker than any amount of truth does, because truth is boring. Truth takes time. Like in space travel, the truth of space travel is going over many generations already. Fantasy can happen overnight.
Yeah, but you see, you got to look at it realistically. These people are not going to be, for example, the investors aren't going to be investing millions and billions of dollars into putting up nothing that's just going to keep falling back to Earth without getting a return on it first. So I believe that's fine and dandy. But the thing I have a problem with is when these guys can't get to the moon and they claim that they've got there 60 years ago or 55 years ago, and they can't even get near it today. Heck, they can't even do a spacewalk. They have to sit there and hold on to rails. That's the problem that I have. All this equipment, I mean, it's 2024. It's about time they finally getting these things to work. They couldn't get them to work in the 60s.
Well, we'll wait till the Axion spacesuits come out because they might actually get something that's viable. How many reruns have they had on it? 4 or 5 now?
Well, why would they bother making a spacesuit when they already have one?
That's right. Just call up Joe Fernandez and order a couple hundred spacesuits from him. He goes into his costume designers at the Hollywood studios and they make them up and away they go because they seem to work now. This is the whole thing because that's what I'm talking about. That triggers people's imagination.
But why did it take such a short period of time to make these spacesuits? SpaceX has had them for a couple of years now. Look, those ones that SpaceX are using right now to go out there to do those spacewalks that they just did, which were not spacewalks, but let's give it to them anyway. He had those suits for a few years now.
Yeah, but those they were in flight suits only. Then all of a sudden, you hook a pipe on it, now they're an outdoor suit. They didn't change.
When he was sending them up to the ISS, those are the same suits that he's using.
Those were flight suits indoors. They weren't designed to be out in space.
No, not those ones.
Right. And all he did is hook hose on the leg of it. Now it's an EVA suit instead of an IVA suit.
He's had those suits now for a few years. So why are they still in competition, Axiom and Collins? Why are they still in competition to make spacesuits when these ones already worked a few years ago?
It's easier to trigger the imagination on people and keep them active. Here, we got a spacesuit. We're going to do this. Right. The next version will be landing on Mars with them.
Right, but now you have these investors. The investors want a return. Finally, they're getting a return on these suits. How come Axiom couldn't come up with one of these suits? Look they're in the 3rd or 4th generation spacesuit right now, and they still don't work.
That's right.
Now, and all of a sudden, Musk puts these suits on. The suits were made for more or less for flight suits. Now we see these things outside and spacewalks now. Those are motorcycle type helmets. So tell me something. I could see the seal in the front, but what about the seals that are on the pivots of the helmet? You're telling me
those seals at the front can't work because they're just rubber.
Right. You go back to Joyce Deaver and what we see when she was doing those vacuum experiments outside the ISS and in her chamber in the laboratory. Those washers, those rubber seals, washers she was using, they expanded 3 to 4 times what they were before they went in. Then they dried out and cracked. So how is that going to work? And tore 10 to the minus 8.
And not only that, they're working with the best rubber materials and silicone additives and everything else they could put into those rubber products to try and make them hold. And they're still failing. They couldn't even come up with a better material that would resist, that is flexible and stuff like that. And that's what I said. The reality is it's troublesome and it's boring and it goes on for years without anything. To have an industry, to have people fund money into it, it has to be exciting. It has to trigger the imagination. And that's where Musk is working. You take a look at billionaires, the funding that's going into there is to trigger the imagination.
Yeah, but it has to work in order for them to get a return on it.
Eventually, it so-called has to work. And you see, Virgin Galactic got to the point where their program wasn't working well enough. And they weren't willing to just fake it and say, oh, here, we're flying around the world in low Earth orbit for tourists. And their program failed because people pulled the money out. Even Musk is such a large corporation that the money is still happening there within the stock market, the way it's trading in and out. That's a big trigger to keep it going. I like how they write some of this stuff. Flash fire aboard Apollo 204, Apollo 1. They don't say complex 34, it says 34.
That's where the test was taking place.
The reason why they put it up on top was they wanted to do a plugs out test, which means that they want to take everything that is externally connected to that capsule and they want to run everything on the actual equipment inside of it to test the whole thing to make sure it was going to work.
They could do that on the shop floor. They didn't have to put it 200 feet in the air.
No, that's the whole thing. Why would you do that? You think you would do that inside of a shop or inside of a hangar. You don't need to put it up there.
All the rest of the tests were, even the ones that caught fire before and killed the animals that they put inside.
You think with all those oxygen fires they had, which were 7 of them in total, 8 if you include Apollo 1, you think they after 7 calorific bombs that they produced, you think that they would say, hey, this doesn't work. We're going to stop it.
Every animal they put in on board on those things when they were doing testing died. So on the 8th day, they said, let's put humans in there. I mean, it's in Ralph Renee's book.
You see, even though they had a fire axe there, because you could see it laying on the floor, and that's the one with the pointed end on it. This was aluminum, friends. Why couldn't they have used the back end of that axe with the point on it to just hack their way through it? It was aluminum, for crying out loud. It was just thin aluminum.
They should have had a chop saw out there just to buzz it right open if they needed it after that many times. But that's why they were 200 feet in the air, because you can't have hardly any people around you on that platform up there. You can't pull in with a truck, you can't do anything else, and you can't grab other equipment. You're 200 feet in the air with what you've got in your hands. 20 minutes to open the door should never happen, especially when the doors had explosive bolts designed into them. I think the only thing we're getting from this document is that it was premeditated.
Yeah, it sure looks that way, doesn't it? I wonder if Scott Grissom has seen this. Probably.
Any statements from he said it was quite intentional. He states quite clearly that it was murder and it was intentional.
Problem is, they'll never prove it 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt.
It would definitely keep the other astronauts in line to pull off the ruse.
Well, it's certainly true that Scott Grissom, that's Gus Grissom's son, did examine the capsule. He got permission because it's away somewhere. It's not easily accessible. He examined it and he knew what he was looking for. And by the sound of it, he discovered what he was looking for, which was something that created the short circuit, which in turn created the spark, which ignited the oxygen, the pressurized oxygen.
Did he not also say that the suits had cyanide gas injected into them?
I didn't see that being reported, no.
I've seen that a couple of times on there that to make sure that the astronaut, because if you have a fire inside the suit, if those suits were as good as they claim, even the explosion and impact wouldn't knock them out. I mean, it didn't knock the windows out when it exploded. The suit is protecting them. The suit is like a fire suit for them.
Yeah, it
They're
is.
going to be well protected on that. And I mean, they probably planned on the fact that the astronauts wouldn't die right away. They had to make sure that door stayed shut.
Let's face it, if there's oxygen in the hoses going to the suit and that caught on fire, it's going to travel through the hoses into the suit and it's going to literally cook them in there.
That's a separate container whatsoever, the fire that was inside the craft would have burned itself right out. They had to keep feeding that fire. You have a little flashbang in there, it burns all the oxygen, it just snuffs itself out. You're in a sealed container. They're inside a suit that has a sealed line to a air supply for them. Unless that particular piece was on fire, it would still just snuff itself out.
Yeah, it would. That's a good point.
The fire should have gone out.
Even if there were other flammable things around, there would be no oxygen in the air.
There's nothing flammable in that craft other than the casing on the wiring.
There was Velcro, apparently.
That wouldn't do a whole lot of damage. You're in a protective suit, basically a fire suit. Insulated to protect yourself against whatever. It can take all kinds of pressure. It can take meteorite impacts. It can do everything. These suits were impervious to everything. Yep. You couldn't get harmed in these suits. You could walk through that fire no problem and just walk right out of there. And I'm quite sure that they protected well enough for 3 to 4 minutes of intense fire before they got hot. Don't forget they got a cooling unit in there as well around their body. They've got a liquid cooled vest and stuff on them. They can run around for 8 hours on the moon at 250 degree temperature on their suits. A little flash fire isn't going to bother them at all. They were counting on the fact that the explosion inside the craft wasn't going to knock them out.
One has to wonder who would have given the order that that would have happened, that this accident would be created. Somebody must have decided to do it.
Well, if you're sitting there and you're relying on the entire country to pull a mission off to end a Cold War, somebody would decide that if they're going to fake it to try and prove it, if somebody's going to expose that, somebody would shut them down, definitely. They'd go, we need to get rid of these people because we're protecting the country. And there's always somebody that can come up with that kind of logic. There's no different than any military general when he has to decide how many people he's going to go flank the next hill. And he knows that people are going to die. This is the same type of decision. Well, we're doing it for the country, for the American flag.
Oh, probably the American flag, yes.
The poor old wet American flag.
Very wet. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Well, I like to put that in there because, man, it's wet. They can argue all they want. They get pissed off at it. I like the fact that they discuss it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, there's quite a bit in those documents.
Yeah, it is. Looking at the end, there's a long letter at the end, which I haven't read all of it. It looks like it's come from Ramstein, which is the US base in West Germany, or Germany now. The letter addressed to the Security Authorities Rocket Launching Base, Kennedy, Florida. Attention of the security officer. And it's quite a long letter, all to do with the flash fire on board Apollo 1, referring to an article, presumably in Life magazine. Page 100, the picture of the cover of the letter that presumably was received. The place appears to be Ramstein, which is the US Air Force base in what was then West Germany. So it could be somebody who was working in that base and has written this 3-page letter. There's an interesting comment on it right at the beginning. First of all, there is no such thing as coincidence, accident, or chance in the true sense of these words. Things just don't blow up by themselves by chance. This attitude has nothing to do with fatalism or any kind of religion. There is a cause for everything, as sure as every action causes a reaction. It's an interesting starting point.
What's interesting, though, is that these actually have stamps. Like, these are the proper stamps. They're not made up.
No, it's for real. No, these are genuine documents. There was obviously quite a lot of concern by people who did understand what they were talking about, that this wasn't an accident. Because he says there's no such thing as coincidence, accidents, or chance, which is correct, basically. Just that we don't know what the true cause was. It's not Ramstein, it's Remscheid, West Germany. The name is redacted. It was sent to Kennedy Space Center, Florida. I think it's just a concerned citizen putting his thoughts on paper and sending them to the right place. And it's been included in this because it's to do with Apollo 1. It takes people a while because it's a fairly esoteric subject. Not everybody's interested in it. But if people begin to understand that we discuss so many different aspects of it, not just what happened on Apollo, I mean, it's an interesting area, but it connects with what's going on today. You know, when people begin to realize that Apollo was just the predecessor of Artemis, and Artemis is current, and we're now seeing the problems that Artemis is having, as well as the problems that Elon Musk is having as well. He's an extraordinary guy. You know, he's running not only SpaceX, but he's running Tesla, and he's got, I think, 2 other companies he's doing as well, which are not quite so high profile.
But yet he has spare time to answer people's questions. Like, for example, the everyday astronaut. And I mean, look at some of the people, they're just regular YouTubers on his base. It's crazy. And yeah, I don't know where he gets the time either.
You know where he gets the energy from? Well, he captured the Eveready bunny, and he's breeding them.
Now, why didn't I think of that? It's an interesting comment, this article about the Apollo 13 film. There's a comment in the article about Jeff and Susan, that's the children of James Lovell. Jeff and Susan sigh at the burgeoning anti-science movement, moon landing conspiracists, and growing community of flat earthers. They say, we have a family rule never to speak about politics, but they both suspect that an angry world could take some lessons from the steely logical thinking and the team spirit shown by Apollo crews. So it's interesting they mentioned that. Anti-science, moon landing conspiracists, and flat earth. The fact that they've put them all together indicates that it's becoming a problem with NASA.
But lumping this, I mean, Apollo, it's science, black body radiation. You have the inverse square law you can use. There's all these different science principles. You cannot use that on flat Earth. So I wish people would stop comparing this to flat Earth.
Yeah, it's a diversionary tactic. Desperation that NASA have got to the point of using flat Earth. It's sad, really, because it's nothing to do with it. It's nothing to do with Apollo. Flat Earth is nothing to do with Apollo. It's being used politically. It demonstrates the problems that NASA are having, that they have to use that sort of pathetic behavior to try to discredit us because we're becoming rather important. A lot of people are taking up what we're saying. I think the comments that we've seen recently indicate that, and the increased number of subscribers indicate that as well. If people discover us, you know, that we're still here, it might be worth telling people to let others know that they can find us now. 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 Find us now.